Oklahoma's got a defense. How dominant will it be? Let's break it down with Jason Ray on Oklahoma Sooners Live here, our 9th edition as we head toward July, Big 12 Media Days, and August camp. Jason, how you doing today?
Good, Mark. How are you doing, sir?
I am doing just fine. I appreciate everybody joining us on this alternate day, typically on Friday, 2:30 Eastern and 1:30 Central. Blame me. I'm the guy that changed the schedule this week, so blame me. But typically on Friday, this is not a change to the regularly scheduled show, but this is just typically something we need to do from time to time because schedules change. So we're glad for everyone who can join us here on a Monday. All right, Jason. We broke down the offense last week. We would ask that everybody, as usual, would take your producer role and leave us comments, questions, debate topics there in the chat. You ultimately do produce the show, and we will address all your comments and your questions. But we're marching through the defense this week, and to get us rolling, I guess, would be that enormous loss up front in Ronnie Perkins starting there, of course, as he moves on. But that defensive front.
Yeah, I think it's such a refreshing topic to kind of discuss, Mark. I know over years and years, it's just kind of been the offense and the defense has been the afterthought. But I know just really just talking to people and just understanding where Oklahoma needs to go from a maturation perspective overall, just in terms of their team. But then just the excitement about how Oklahoma finished last year and just what they have returning is really exciting to kind of talk about and think about for Oklahoma, coming into the 2021 season. So to your point, big loss up front with Ronnie Perkins certainly was something that I think most expected, specifically on how well he played later in the year coming off of his suspension. But I think the difference in this team, Mark, is that I've heard this a couple of times, and you try and you take it with a little bit of grain of salt. But I've heard some experts saying that from an athletic perspective, Oklahoma's defense looks closer to what you would see as an Alabama or Clemson type defense, kind of coming off the bus type of a look than they've been maybe ever or in a long time. So I think that's, certainly obviously refreshing to kind of talk about and think about from that perspective. But I think I would say that it all starts up front with Isaiah Thomas. Isaiah Thomas was one of the better defensive linemen in the league last year, specifically on the team. I believe he was second on the team in sacks. He was right there with Nick Benito in terms of overall sacks of the year. So really good at getting to the quarterback, either at the defensive end position or the defensive tackle position, where he played probably a little bit more last year at the defensive tackle position. So I think you'll see him move out towards the end a little bit more this year. So I think having him just the flexibility of him being able to defensive tackle or defensive end is really helpful, just in terms of being able to move players around a little bit. Then from a nose tackle, Perrion Winfrey had a really solid year in his first year, from junior college play. He's a kid that, what you've seen through the offseason, he's a kid that's worked extremely hard. He's put himself in position late last year. He made a ton of plays. He was almost, he got a lot of double teams, specifically late in the year, and he was really overpowering. A lot of times he would bust through some of those double teams. I think that not really the problem, but I think the area of growth for him is being able to finish some of those plays with a tackle, finish some of those plays with a sack, finish some of those plays with really just kind of a dominating play, behind the line of scrimmage. So you got him there. And then I think one of the big wild cards for this team up front is going to be Jalen Redmond. Coming off of the COVID opt-out year, was pretty good. He's only played, he's had a lot of time within the program, but he's only really had one solid year that he's not been injured in some ways. Certainly last year wasn't an injury, but even before that. So, his ability to kind of play in the middle of the defensive tackle position will allow Isaiah Thomas to move outside a little bit. So I think that's going to be big for Oklahoma from a depth perspective. And when you talk a little bit about the depth, at defensive end, another guy that played a lot in the spring game is Reggie Grimes. He'll probably be Isaiah Thomas's primary backup. Didn't play a lot last year. However, what was a big time recruit for Oklahoma in the 2020 class. So, he'll be a guy that he'll provide some depth for Oklahoma at the nose tackle position. Josh Ellison played a lot last year. Oklahoma's probably, they've got more depth at the nose tackle position than they've had in 10 or 15 years, because they've got Perrion Winfrey. They've got Josh Ellison, who was another junior college kid last year that played split time with Perrion Winfrey. They have Jordan Kelly, who's another kid that played sparingly last year. And then another name to look out for is Isaiah Coe. He's another junior college guy who's a kid that we've seen some of his photos, in the spring throughout the summer, and he was a guy that's he absolutely looks the part. Not sure how well he was going to be able to put it together on the field early on, but he's a guy that, coming off of the bus, as we mentioned, he's a guy that's going to play. He'll probably play a little bit. I'm not sure, exactly how much he'll play, depending on how he matures through the season, early on and through the fall camp. And then when you look at the other defensive tackle position, I mentioned Jalen Redmond, who's a guy that they like there. Laurent Stokes is another guy who came back for his fifth year. Could have he's a guy that was one of the Big 12 newcomers of the year a few years ago. He's a guy that a lot of people think that could get drafted. So they got a lot of depth up front, more depth than I think they would be comfortable, going 2, 3, and even some instances 4 deep, with rotating those guys and keeping those guys fresh throughout the game.
Got Jason Ray here talking Oklahoma football each and every week with us here at the Voice of College Football OU. We would ask that you would please subscribe, hit that bell for the notifications. That way you're on top of situations like today when we've got to change the live stream schedule. So we appreciate everybody who can join us here live on a Monday. If not, you're watching us on the replay, so that works as well. Leave your comments below either way. And we are talking Oklahoma defense. Jason's breaking it down for us level by level. The defense, Nick Benito, one of, let's see, as I counted up, 3 out of 6, it appears on the depth chart, if you look at the 2 deep, coming back at the linebacking spot.
Yeah, no, he's certainly probably the best and the leader of that linebacking core, playing that rush in for Oklahoma, which means a lot of times he's lined up on the edge of the line of scrimmage, but also will come back in coverage in the back end as well. So, I think having him back from a rush in perspective is really good for he was a guy who was really considering going early in the draft, and he decided to come back for an opportunity to win a championship for Oklahoma. So he's a guy that will certainly have that rush end kind of nailed down. There's no real discussion about that from a depth perspective. Marcus Stripling has actually moved over from a defensive end, moved to that rush end. He'll play a lot. He'll give some a lot of depth there as well. At the Mike position, so I think you got 2 kids that are going to play a lot. David Agwebu and Deshaun White are 2 kids that will play. Deshaun White started the season. Agwebu started to get a little bit more playing time. I think there's a lot of people that like Agwebu as maybe more of kind of a Kenneth Murray could have a breakthrough season this season. I think you'll see both of those players play a lot. It'll be a big battle in the fall, probably the biggest battle of the front 7, just to see who will, he'll get that starting position. Don't really think it matters a ton, because you'll see both of those guys play a lot. And then really kind of looking at the will linebacker position, Brian Asamoah comes back. He'll be, he's a 2-year starter at that position. He'll certainly be there. And I think a kid that a lot of Oklahoma fans will root for to certainly maybe even start, but play a lot and stay healthy is Caleb Kelly. He's come back over so many injuries, so much turmoil that he's had, in his life from a health perspective, and he will be back. He's probably going to be their primary backup there at the will, so certainly we'll get a lot of playing time. But I think looking at another couple of kids, Shane Whittier is a guy that Oklahoma's really just kind of raved about in the spring. So, in terms of his speed, I think he runs about a 4.4, 4.5. So, excellent speed at the linebacker position. So he'll provide a lot of depth there at the Mike linebacker. True freshman Clayton Smith is a guy that was, I think, coming into the spring, a lot of people thought he was probably Oklahoma's most ready true freshman to be able to play a little bit. Didn't play a ton, played a little bit towards the end of the spring game. Heard some, there's some things about just maybe him not getting it quickly enough, kind of from a mental perspective, and seeing how that progresses in the fall will be interesting as well. But again, much like the defensive line, the depth is there, and the depth is pretty solid at the linebacker position, maybe more so than any other position on the team. I think they feel good about any of those guys at a 3 and 4 string depth perspective.
Folks, please hit the like button to help us further the content. If you understand anything about YouTube, it's not to make us feel good. It's to work the algorithms there on YouTube because that's the way it works. They wanted some feedback in regards to people's engagement with the content. So please hit the like button. Share these videos out on social media. So whether it's just to say, hey, here's the link, or we're getting together at 2:30 Eastern today and talking Oklahoma football live, whether that's directly word of mouth to your family, your friends, those people that love college football that you know of out there in your circles, please let them know that we are here talking OU football with Jason Ray right here at the Voice of College Football. All right, breaking down the OU defense, and just to highlight some of the guys that Jason reviewed here. Asamoah led the team with 66 tackles last year, 16 more than Turner Yell, 5.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, and a pick. And Nick Benito contributing big as well. 33 stops, 11.5 tackles for loss, and 9 sacks. He put up the biggest numbers in those two categories, along with Isaiah Thomas last year. And there you have it at the linebacking spot. I got 2 questions, but I'll wait until we get through the entire defense. Trey Norwood, Trey Brown, they depart. How do we look at corner?
Yeah, I think when you look at the secondary overall, Mark, it's probably a bigger question mark than any other spot on the defense. And I think part of that is because of the guys that you talked about, Trey Brown, Trey Norwood lost from the team last year, and maybe the depth, not that it's a weakness, but it may not necessarily be quite as strong as the defensive line and the linebacking group. So you'll have, Woody Washington is a guy that played a lot last year. I certainly project him to be one of the starting cornerbacks. DJ Graham played a lot more towards the end of the year, started in the Cotton Bowl game against Florida. He's a guy, athleticism is off the charts. He kind of moved positions. He came to Oklahoma as really kind of an athlete recruit. He moved to the cornerback position. And Alex Grinch had just raved about this kid's athleticism, and then he kind of started to come together for him towards the last part of the year. He played a little bit more. So I think Oklahoma has good depth there, but I think those are the 2 guys that I would see being the starting cornerbacks. You got Jaden Davis, who's played a lot for Oklahoma as well, and reserve duty. He'll challenge DJ Graham for one of the cornerback spots. Latrell McCutcheon, true freshman out of Texas, he'll play a lot as well. Played, I think his biggest concern will just be experience. He's got the talent, he's got the physical skills. The weight, getting stronger and getting bigger in the off season here is going to be big for him, just in terms of being able to kind of take that pounding of a season. So that'll be interesting to see how much he's able to push, from a playing time perspective. And looking at the safeties, you mentioned Delaren Turner Yell just a little bit ago. He's going to be there from a strong safety perspective, should be the starter. Justin Harrington, junior college guy, who was missed early in the year last year, one of the one of the biggest junior college recruits that they had last year, along with some of the defensive tackles, is going to be there. He'll challenge Turner Yale, but not sure exactly where Harrington will fall. They had decided to move him to cornerback a little bit in the spring. Not that it was a failed experiment, but I kind of project him to move more kind of either the safety position or maybe the nickelback side. Just Oklahoma feels pretty strong, pretty good about their depth at the cornerback position. If they do, then may move him to more of the safety. I think the biggest positional battle that you'll see, Mark, here is at the free safety position between Pat Fields and Key Lawrence. So Key Lawrence is obviously the transfer from Tennessee. Physical skills off the charts. I think there was a couple of interviews I thought was interesting that even from the defensive secondary, some of the players and coaches said when Lawrence is keyed up, when he's ready to go, he can be one of the best players that they have on the team. So I think maybe that just his ability to be consistent and bringing that effort, bringing that intensity every single day is maybe the challenge there. Whereas you got Pat Fields, who's a guy that's played a lot. He was a captain last year, and I know it's kind of hard to think about a captain of a previous the previous year not even starting. So at this point, I would really project Key Lawrence to kind of grab that spot just from his athleticism perspective, and specifically with Pat Fields missing the entire spring on a small little injury. So, but that'll be a big battle throughout the throughout the summer and fall camp. And then really just kind of the last position at the nickelback. You have Jeremiah Cradell. You have a couple of kids that haven't played a lot that are probably going to be asked to play a little bit, certainly more this year. Jeremiah Cradell hadn't played a lot. He's a guy that Alex Grinch talked about. It was really kind of coming together for him throughout the end of last year and then early in the spring. A guy that he hasn't seen a player improve more from one year to the next than what he saw out of Cradell. So if he can carry that over into the fall, I think he's good there. But a wild card is Billy Bowman, true freshman who played a lot in the spring game as well. Cradell was out of the spring game, so Billy Bowman played a lot. Really held his own against Marvin Mims, matched up with him a lot in the slot. Really in a one-on-one perspective, held Mims to only 2 catches for the entire game. So played. He's a guy that's ready. I think he's ready physically to play immediately. So that'll be an interesting battle to see how that works out as well.
We talk Oklahoma football here every day here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate everybody being here for the live stream that's typically on Friday, this week on a Monday. So thanks for hanging with us and staying up to date. Subscribe, hit the bell for the notifications. That way you know when we drop new content and also when we're going live, especially when there's a time change. And we got Jason Ray breaking down the Oklahoma defense. If you have yet to catch up with the offensive breakdown, that posted last week. So please check that out. Leave your comments in the live chat. And if you're watching us after the fact, of course, you can still leave your comments and we will get to as many as possible. So basically, when you look at each level of the Oklahoma defense, D-line, linebacker, secondary, best unit since starting with the defensive line. This is the best Oklahoma defensive line since generally when?
I would think it's close between probably 2003 and 2008. So I think, the last time that Oklahoma made it to the national championship game was that 2008 season. It's the Sam Bradford. They had a kid named Gerald McCoy. I think most people know. He's Oklahoma. I don't know that Oklahoma has a guy as good as Gerald McCoy, but I think the parts are just as good as what they've had that year. So I think so. When you take it from that perspective, I think it's just probably from 2008. So. But when you think about it, that's a long time. I mean, 13 years ago. And then when you're talking about, even if you want to go back to 2003 as a collective unit, looking at it from almost 20 years ago. So yeah, I think it's from my perspective, I think it's safe to say this is the best talent, the best depth that they've had defensive line since 2008.
So now if we jump to linebackers, where would you make the same assessment in regards to that unit?
Yeah, I would certainly go back to 2003 from a linebacker perspective. When you look back there, you've got in that era, Mark, you've got some outstanding kids that played during you talk about Teddy Lehman, you talk about Rocky Calmus, you talk about Torrance Marshall in that area, not necessarily 2003, but in that era
Yep.
of play. And again, very much the same comment that I would make. Oklahoma doesn't have a Teddy Lehman. Oklahoma doesn't have a Rocky Calmus, but I think collectively they've got about 7 or 8 guys that they feel really, really good about, in being able to put them in a position to be a top 15, be a top 20 defense overall.
I just went back to the 2008 roster and familiarized myself, got reacquainted with some names that I had long since forgotten. Travis Lewis had 144 tackles in 2008.
Yeah. Well,
that's a crazy number.
And I had even forgotten about Travis Lewis as being part of that group. So yeah, when you think about him as well, yeah, I mean he was a tremendous tackler, and really just kind of a ball hawking linebacker. So yeah, I mean I think to say that you're putting this group in, kind of with that group as well, and keep in mind how well. Oklahoma obviously lost that national championship game, but they held Florida to 21 points in that game. So, they played well enough to win. How we've talked about Oklahoma over the last few years. If Oklahoma holds these teams to 21 points, they would have won the national championship in one of these last 4 seasons. So, yeah, if they can get back to that level of holding whoever would be in a playoff game to 21 points, and they're where they need to be.
Yeah, guys like Dominique Franks and Lindy Holmes, Keenan Clayton, Nick Harris, Brian Jackson, Jeremy Beal, and of course Gerald McCoy as well. All right, secondary. How good's the secondary compared to recent years, and where would you rate it versus previous top-rated Oklahoma DBs?
Believe it or not, Oklahoma in 2017, that team wasn't terrible on the back end. And this was I think I'm stating the wrong date or the wrong year. I'm trying to remember the year. Maybe it was 2015. No, that's too far back. You can help me. So when Oklahoma played Clemson in the Final Four, the playoffs that year,
15.
Is it 15? Okay.
Yeah.
So I would say 2015. They weren't terrible in the back end that year. They actually had some, played a little where they were lacking is on the offensive and defensive lines that year, because they hadn't really kind of built, Bill Bedenbaugh hadn't been there too long at that point. So they hadn't built the offensive line to really what it was now. And defensive line, they just didn't have the talent. They didn't have, and they got worn down in the second half against Clemson and Deshaun Watson. So I would think I would go back to 2015. But, certainly if you can kind of go back to, 2008, 2009 there as well.
Zach Sanchez had 7 interceptions for that defense, and Jordan Thomas had 5, and going to a different position. But Eric Stryker was always one of my favorite players to watch. That boy could come off the edge and was a menace. 17.5 tackles for loss and 7 sacks. Breaking down the OU defense, got Jason Ray on the line from Last Word on College Football. Would invite all of you to head on over to Last Word on College Football to see Jason's work, and also a number of other friends of myself, Tony Siracusa, Kevin McGuffey, doing good work over there covering the game we love. All right, Alex Grinch. We've touched on this in the past, Jason. But in regards to what he brings, of course, recruiting has much to do with the improvement on the defensive side of the football. But in regards to Alex Grinch, what is he doing that has been integral to the upgrade?
I think he just brings a renewed excitement to the defense you know, and not that not that Mike Stoops didn't do that, but I think, you know, the way that Mike Stoops had coached this team, you know, kind of got to the point, and his antics on the sidelines, and I think it kind of bordered on, you know, kind of insanity. The way that he, uh, you know, the way that he was very in your face, very kind of, and I don't know the way to really describe it. He was in players' faces all the time, and I think it was a part where I think Oklahoma needed a fresh face. I think they needed a change. I think they needed someone that really had success defending the spread. I think Mike Stoops had talked about several times, and on, you know, kind of changing his strategy on how exactly you stop the spread, how exactly you stop the offenses in this league, where you and also have to understand that you have to stop some of those same offenses in a playoff game. So I think a guy that kind of was young, very energetic, very much like Lincoln Riley on the offensive side. I think when we brought him in, I think that's who Riley kind of saw as a guy that's a really good recruiter. I think is a guy that has gotten a lot out of his talent, specifically, you know, when he was at Washington State, and then, you know, moving on to Ohio State as well, and then, you know, how he's recruited, and how he's, you know, at a national level, and now the talent that he's able to bring in. So I think it's just a renewed emphasis, a renewed excitement in the program, and really he's a guy that relates to these kids maybe a little bit more than what they've had in the past, and, you know, he just demands much more than I think that has been demanded really in the past, but really in a different way. He's talked a lot about a lot of the kids in the past. They knew when their time come, they would just play from a default perspective, right? So they knew other kids, it was just their time to play. So I think he's had a renewed sense of urgency within the program itself, to understand that, you know, just because you're a senior doesn't necessarily mean that you're the next man up. You know, we've got true freshmen, we've got redshirt freshmen, we've got sophomores that are, you know, that are hungry to play, and hungry to be successful, and the talent upgrade, or the talent has been upgraded so much to a degree that some of these kids are ready to come in and play as true freshmen. So you better be ready. So I think that renewed, you know, kind of enthusiasm and excitement, and, you know, within the program itself has allowed the recruiting to get better, has allowed a lot of that, you know, that talent to kind of take shape, and, you know, holding them at a greater accountability for themselves and their performance on the field, has been a big difference maker. You know, his you know, he's been harping on it for, you know, almost 2 years about getting turnovers, and it finally came to fruition there towards the last part of the year, where Oklahoma was forcing, you know, multiple turnovers, and they got, you know, to a point where they were one of the best teams in the country in forcing turnovers, specifically over the last half of the year. So I think a lot of those things are starting to kind of take hold. So I think now what you would expect in year 3 for Grinch is that consistency. We've talked a little bit about that, you know, from time to time, in terms of specifically last year, even when they were struggling a little bit on the defensive side, you know, they would play well for times, but then they would have a quarter where they would really struggle. We talked about Kansas State in the fourth quarter, Texas in the fourth quarter, Iowa State in the fourth quarter, and then they put those together a little bit more in the last half of the year, and they were a lot more successful. So being able to do that on a more consistent basis is, I think, the next step for his team, his defensive leadership, and just the play of the defense overall.
I think it's ingrained in most coaches, and this is a good thing generally, and it's understandable, and it can be respected as well, that they tend to want to reward guys that have been in the program, have shown that they're going to work, they're going to learn, they respect the system, the process, they build relationships with those guys. So they just generally want them to elevate. So if there's a senior versus a redshirt freshman, well, they have more investment in the senior. It's not that they like them anymore, but they've been around them. They've built a relationship. And as long as that senior has, again, been a good citizen and done all the right things, then there's got to be something, I think, inherent in all of us that would root for that particular person and want to favor them to start them. And they have to disregard that to a certain extent. Now, certainly you're going to take their experience and their knowledge of the game into, not just pick the best athlete. The best athletes don't always start. It's a combination of obviously game preparation, being ready, being knowledgeable, all sorts of things that go in that complement obviously the athleticism, but just there being an inherent want to reward the players that have been in the program for years and have made the investment.
No, I think that's a very good point, and that's what had happened for a long time for Oklahoma, and it's it's tough. I think you have to balance the fact, to your point, that you want to reward some of those kids that have been in the program, but at the same time, you're about winning championships at this level. So, if you have a kid that's been in the program for 5 years and he doesn't have the same drive, he doesn't have the same talent, doesn't have the same work ethic and desire to be, at the top of his position, then I think you automatically will want to play that freshman or play that sophomore. And I think that's why mentality goes a long way. I think maybe even more so on the defensive side than the offensive side of the ball, because, and me and you just sitting here, we put ourselves in the Oklahoma's defense's shoes for, these last few years. I mean, just looking at the product that they're that they have been putting on the field from an offensive perspective, and looking at, as a defensive player, what we're doing, you have to kind of question what that mentality would look like for those kids. Do they feel, is it just depressing for them to go on the field knowing that, hey, this other side of the ball, they're carrying their weight. We're not doing what we need to do, or is it, they lost faith in the coaching staff? What was it? So I think that the big part of that mentality, I think, really has been turned around. There's a lot of interviews that I saw in the spring of a lot of these players really kind of talking about that the culture's already defined here now. No one comes in and, is trying to, adjust to a different culture, adjust to a different, style. It's the way Oklahoma's defense is now. So I think that's, obviously a big balancing act. I mean, in every, coaches may not say this, but there's some, you want to reward those kids that have been through the years, been through the tough times, and, coming, better out of the other side. But especially knowing that what's at stake, you have to be in a position to, make the tough call to play that true freshman over the fifth-year senior that, maybe has a bigger upside.
Yeah, Jason Ray on the line to break down Oklahoma football for us. We have run through the defense, so if you're just joining us, please wait for the video to post, and you can check Jason's work on the Oklahoma defense, and of course, check out last week's live stream when we addressed the offense. Please keep in mind we got a super chat available, as well as Venmo, PayPal, Cash App. Contribute to Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Brittany. It's always interesting when we try to delve into the hearts and minds of people, but do you think Lincoln Riley and or Alex Grinch will leave if Oklahoma wins the national championship this year?
Those questions are, I mean, they're good questions, obviously, but I think they're very difficult to answer, just in terms, especially. So let's kind of talk about Alex Grinch for example. So I think it automatically depends on what jobs are open. Right. I mean, you look at that. I don't think he's a guy that's going to take a job just to take a job. Washington State came up. He didn't even choose to interview. There was another job that he was linked to. I'm trying to remember exactly what school it was, but there was another job that he was linked to. This off season. Didn't really have a whole lot of interest in that. So I think Grinch is a guy that is really going to want to. Maybe not necessarily a blue blood, but I think he's going to want to be at a fairly high profile Power 5 school. So I think he's waiting for that opportunity. So and I'm just throwing out a team here. So if a team, let's just say Maryland opened up, I think that might be something that he would look at. Having said that, I would be surprised if they continue to have the same success on the defensive side of the ball, continue to get better and win a national championship, or even win a playoff game for that matter. A couple years from that, I don't see him being around for more than a couple of years. Now, with Riley's a different story. I think there's very few places that he would be willing to go. He's said for multiple years that the Dallas Cowboys is intriguing to him from an NFL perspective. So I think there's a couple of jobs in the NFL that he would be interested in going to. If you win it, specifically if they win a championship, well, in either this year or in the coming years, I think that's probably one of the only jobs that he would leave for if they win a championship. Now, if he doesn't win a championship in the next, let's just say 2 or 3 years, I could see him looking potentially at maybe broadening his maybe search is not the right word, but broadening his option to where he would go. And you think about this, and this is not being a homer or homerism, but there's not a whole lot of jobs at the FBS level that's better than what he has right now. I mean, obviously, you have Alabama, you have Clemson. I mean, Alabama's the best job in the country, obviously, right now, just from what Nick Saban's been able to do there. Clemson's not a traditional blue blood, but the way that Dabo's brought them forward, it's a big time job. So there's probably, I don't know, Mark, 3 or 4 jobs that you could consider that might be better than the one that he has now, maybe. So I think the only thing that probably gets him thinking or potentially has him interested in looking elsewhere is, we're 3-4 years down the road. We're sitting here 2025 and Oklahoma still hasn't won a national championship. Then maybe I think the thought creeps in his mind, okay, can I win one here? Is maybe the story. So other than that, if they win a championship, I would not expect him to leave anytime soon.
Our guy CE is saying that Clayton Smith, who was one of the great recruits in the country last year, top 40 player, second-rated edge rusher, coming out of Texas to Oklahoma, is going to have a Roy Williams type presence. Well, that's good news if that comes to fruition, because Roy Williams is a legend.
Well, yeah, and he's a kid that I talked about all spring as someone that I thought was ready to be a factor early on for Oklahoma. And it didn't really happen as much in the spring. There was some contrary, thoughts in terms of how well he's played in the spring versus maybe him not quite being ready right now. So I think the summer's big for him, right? So the summer in running some of those 7-on-7 drills, going through the weight program, and then certainly early on in the fall. And you got to think, not to really. I think he'll be this year, if he gets to the point where he's able to get on the field in meaningful minutes. I think he's a guy that, you don't ask him to do a lot. You just ask him to rush the passer, right? I mean, you don't ask him to do a lot of coverage. You don't ask him to, to do a lot of stunts on the front side of that defensive line. I think he's a guy that, maybe you can put him in third and, predictable passing situations and have him as another pass rusher on the field going to rush the quarterback. So, at that position, you're really going to set the edge and rush the quarterback. So if they feel comfortable enough for him, even if it's in that situation, a very predictable situation where he can rush the quarterback, I do see him getting on the field at some point through the year. And it may be middle of the season, but I think his talent is too good to keep him off the field.
Barney Thompson is blown right by Bob Stoops when it comes to Oklahoma coaching legends, right to Barry Switzer in basically airing a comment that I'm sure a lot of Oklahoma fans, most if not all, can get on board with, that Lincoln will be going for legendary status in the program and stay there and just continue to win Big 12 championships and vie for national championships.
The discussion about the top, coach overall history. I mean, and most people consider Barry Switzer to be the best, and I do as well. But when Bob Stoops is obviously in that, that top 3 or top 4, and when you look at it, Stoops only won the one national championship, and he won. There's an argument that was made that, he won it with John Blake's players. So as good as of a coach that he is, I think the one knock on Stoops is obviously only winning that one national championship in the time that he was there and the opportunities that he had. So I think obviously first Lincoln's got to win that national championship first, and then he can kind of put himself, maybe on that level with Bob Stoops. Maybe not necessarily from a overall kind of totality of his career, but really just from a progression perspective, win that first national championship. So, I mean, it's hard. Like, I think the landscape of college football is much different now than it was in the 70s and 80s when Switzer was there, where they could, I mean, if no other reason, you can talk about the scholarship limits. Switzer talked a lot about he would recruit kids that he knew would never touch the field, but he recruited them so Texas wouldn't get them. He recruited them so the big time programs, Nebraska at that point, wouldn't get them. So I mean, that's not a luxury that any of these teams have now, specifically with the transfer portal. So in scholarship limits, transfer portal, whatever it might be. So I mean, I think he has the opportunity to get to Bob Stoops level, but let's pump the brakes just a bit when we kind of talk about that Barry Switzer level as well, because he'll have to, the bar is set really high with 3 national championships there that Barry Switzer was able to get at Oklahoma. So yeah, let's need him to get that first one first before we can start. From my opinion, where you can start talking about him as maybe potentially being one of the greats in Oklahoma.
And in addition to just getting to the playoff, which is a huge accomplishment, Oklahoma's been up to the task most of the time there. 4 out of 7 years, I believe, is the figure. To win the 2 games in the playoff, that's almost that almost equals the 13 games that it took to get to the playoff to beat the type teams that you're going to have to beat. In some ways is a more difficult challenge than just winning the 13 games or 12-1 record to get to the playoff. Michael, thank you so much for encouraging everyone to hit the like button. And Lewis, we're not going to forget Bud Wilkinson. He of the longest winning streak in the history of college football. 57 games? I believe is the figure.
47, but yes.
47. Yep. Yes.
No. I mean, and I think, he had the 3 national championships as well. So you certainly can't discount that. I think a lot of people probably watching this may not even know who he was, or so I think it's more of kind of a recency thing. But yeah, he and Barry Switzer are certainly on the same plane, just in terms of the accolades that they were able to get while they're at the University of Oklahoma. But yeah, no, him, Wilkinson and Switzer and Stoops are, widely considered the 3 top coaches, certainly at the University of Oklahoma, with probably, you can make an argument with probably Switzer being 1, Wilkinson being 2, and then certainly Stoops being 3.
Bud Wilkinson, of course, we mentioned the 3 national championships and the longest winning streak in history. Oh my goodness. So you're talking about from 1947 through 1959. That's 13 consecutive Big 8 championships. So he won the conference 13 years in a row. And then he won one more time before his final season in 1963. Won 145 games, lost 29. He won 93 in the Big 8 and lost 9. 93 and 9. Yes. So they were loaded. And just phenomenal records. And Barry Switzer's is similar to that kind of dominance,
Right.
high 80s, 90 winning percentage in that range. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the dominance at the conference level. We've talked about that a lot this year, Mark. With when you talk about Clemson and when you talk about Ohio State and Oklahoma, but to your point about how many 9 consecutive conference championships. I mean, we're not even approaching anything like that now. So
13.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry. 13 consecutive. So
yeah,
we've got a ways to go, whether it be whatever conference it is, and certainly the competition is much different now than it was back then. But still, winning 13 consecutive conference championships is kind of incredible to even think about right now.
Barry Switzer won 8 straight, 1973 through 80, with those national championships in 74, 75, and then 85 when he won another 4 consecutive conference championships. So he won a total of 12 conference championships, and his record in conference pretty much the same. Wilkinson 93 and 9, Barry Switzer 100 wins and 11 losses in conference dominance. There you go. All right, talking up OU right here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate everybody being here. And Jason has run through the defense as he ran through the offense last week. We will continue throughout the summer to run through our Big 12 position rankings as well. We've done the offense, let's see, quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers as well. We will continue on through the rest of the units and appreciate everybody being here. And do we have anything else on the line here that I wanted to address? It's currently the best recruiting class in the Big 12 in 2022, with a long ways to go, of course, top 10 in the country. Is there anything coming down the line that you anticipate in the next few weeks from that standpoint?
So it's interesting. So Oklahoma, I mean, not Oklahoma, but specifically recruiting is back in the dead period until I believe July 24th. So, with some of these kids not being able to take visits, you would see probably a lot of some commitments within this next almost month of this dead period from now until July 24th. So, there's not anybody that I outside of, we've talked about Gavin Sawchuk, but there's not anybody else that I'm aware of that right now is pending. But like I said, there's with a lot of those visits, they're letting the barbecue simmer, no pun intended, kind of so to speak, just to look and see. I think there's a lot of momentum that Oklahoma built up through that barbecue and I think they've got a ton of momentum on the 2023 cycle, which will be interesting to see. Malachi Nelson is a guy that is going to commit here in July. All signs seem to point to Oklahoma there. They've got about 3 or 4 5-star kids that they've seen a lot of the crystal balls just pour into Oklahoma after this session. So we may see some 2023 kids announce. Some 2022 kids obviously is of utmost importance from a now perspective. So Gentry Williams as a guy will continue to talk about. It's with him, he seems to be even almost more of a lean towards USC right now, which would be awful, just from a Oklahoma perspective, losing yet another Oklahoma kid. Rayleigh Brown is another guy to think about. He is committed to Oklahoma, and he's been very, very pro Oklahoma, but he does have a very small child. I believe like a 6-month old, and he went to an official visit with USC. Had a picture of his of his baby there on the field with them. You know, getting him to leave California and come all the way to Oklahoma, leaving this 6-month-old behind will be interesting to see how that actually unfolds over the next few months. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting storylines to follow, and I would expect that we would see some commitments over the next month with the dead period that's happened previously. It got released, and then now it's back over the next month to see if any commitments fly through there.
Oklahoma Sooners Live, our 9th edition in the books here. And again, thanks to Jason Ray from Last Word on College Football for making this happen. Please join Jason's work right there on Last Word on College Football. And Lewis, no, I might be one of the few, but I do recall and have not forgotten Bud Wilkinson's work in the broadcast booth. So when I first became a football fan, I remember one of the first pro football magazines I ever purchased at the newsstand when I was like 8 years old. Bud Wilkinson had taken over the St. Louis Cardinals. So he was the head coach of the St. Louis Cardinals. And then that was a short stint for him in the late 70s. And then he moved on to the broadcast booth. And actually, ESPN's first venture into college football meant a lot of replay games. So you would see some games on Saturday, but they wouldn't be able to play them all. So throughout the week, you would see games replayed with Jim Simpson behind the mic and Bud Wilkinson as the analyst. And yeah, he was outstanding. Absolutely. All right, Jason, we appreciate it as always. Appreciate everybody being here. We will see you most likely next Friday, not this Friday, but the next Friday after that, back to our regularly scheduled time, most likely. But again, because of schedule changes, that's why you need to hit the bell for the notifications to know when we are going live. All right, Jason, you have a great week.
All right. Thanks, Mark. You too.